The land of Hyrule has been seen in multiple iterations of Zelda, usually with a significant change in the world's geography. Iconic landmarks such as Death Mountain and Lake Hylia are moved around to keep the experience feeling fresh. Others like Lurelin Village might be new, however they were most likely inspired from locations of past Zelda titles. Hyrule is without a doubt the most used setting for Zelda, being in games like Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and A Link to the Past. But there are times where you'll be lucky enough to explore new lands. Or seas, I guess. Link's Awakening, Majora's Mask, and Phantom Hourglass have their stories take place on Koholint Island, Termina, and the world of the Ocean King. These playthroughs are refreshing since a new world means new landmarks and settlements. Instead of finding another version of Kakariko Village, you can talk to rabbits and bears in Animal Village. Castle Town is great and all, however Termina's Clock Town has more to do, whether it be side quests or minigames. There is a reason I'm talking about this, and it has to do with our recent video where we looked at every Sheikah translation in Breath of the Wild. Link to that video will be in the description. One of the most intriguing had been the Sheikah script found on the tapestry behind Impa. This enciphers a romanization of Japanese text, with this being the Japanese translations. Changing it to English gives us the following. As you can see, it's a third version of the story 10,000 years ago. The first two were told to us from the perspective of Impa and the musician Cass. The part that sparked my interest was line 6, where it reads, "In Hyrule, the Calamity is called Ganon." Clearly, I wasn't the only one who was interested, as a couple of you pointed this exact phrasing out in the comments. The term Calamity doesn't necessarily correlate to Ganon. It's an event causing great and often sudden damage or distress, a disaster. However, this wording implies that this calamity takes other forms in other lands. The tapestry says as much. In Hyrule, the calamity is called Ganon. But this is from the Zelda wiki. I'm not going to make a whole video based on something without a reliable source. That's why I sent this line to someone who regularly helps with proper translations. LoruleanHistorian came back to me with the following. In Hyrule, the name of the calamity is Ganon. The phrasing is slightly different, however the context of the sentence remains the same. With this in mind, how about we look into the hypothetical lands beyond Hyrule? Are there more secrets to be discovered past the Necluda Sea? How does it relate to Demise's curse and the Calamity? And will the sequel delve deeper into this question? There are hints scattered throughout the game that suggest Hyrule is one of many countries. Even if we disregard the other titles that take place in entirely different lands, the conclusion will remain unchanged. This is based off of the information we can find from multiple sources like the game, the sequel's trailer, and Breath of the Wild's Creating a Champion book. The best place to start our search is the fishing settlement located at the coast of the Necluda Sea. Lurelin is one of the few villages that survived the Guardian's attack during the Great Calamity thanks to its location. The vendors here will sell a variety of seafood to the inhabitants and travelers, becoming a famous spot for fishermen as the settlement is along the shoreline of the Necluda Sea. The tropical climate also means that a huge quantity of fresh fruits can be found around the area. Several boats are located within Lurelin Village, some loaded with fishing equipment. However, the bigger buildings, such as the inn and chest game, are built from giant boats. Whether these used to be actual ships or are purely for aesthetic purposes is unknown, but at the very least it confirms that people weren't bound to the land of Hyrule. The existence of transportation via the ocean allowed anyone to leave, or to let outsiders in. Enter the Akkala Citadel, one of Breath of the Wild's biggest structures. This fortress served as a final line of defense against the Guardians during the Calamity. The remaining soldiers fled from Hyrule Castle and had fallen protecting the Citadel. 100 years later, only parts of the structure stand. The ruins are home to both monsters and Skywatchers, the rooms overflowing with malice. The main bridge leading into the fortress now left in shambles, making the climb to the Akkala Tower a difficult one. It's no surprise that the soldiers were outmatched given the lack of both reinforcements and firepower. To this day, cannons are still positioned to defend the stronghold, but are clearly inoperable thanks to the exposure to weather. The Citadel was clearly not built for defense against the Sheikah technology, since they were unaware of the threat of it turning against them. These cannons were built to defend against something smaller, and while we don't know much from the game, creating a champion tells us more about the Citadel on pages 386 and 387. According to the text, the Akkala Citadel's primary function was to repel invaders from across the sea and keep them from marching on central Hyrule. The fortress was built to be impenetrable with its placement of the cannons and layout of the cliffs. But what's interesting is how we can get an idea of when this fortress was built. The Sheikah Tower for Akkala is located right in the center of the Citadel. It's unlikely that they would build a huge structure around the tower, so construction of this stronghold most likely began when the Sheikah were banished and the technology was buried back within the ground. And the stonework of this massive structure doesn't match those built by the Zonai or ancient Hylians. It's the same as the buildings found on the Great Plateau or Castle Town. The real question here is, why would they need this stronghold now? Remember that before the Sheikah's banishment, Hyrule was a highly advanced civilization thanks to the Sheikah technology. Any monsters or invaders posed no threat to the land, and therefore the Citadel wasn't needed. After the Sheikah were exiled, Hyrule lost those technological advancements and were left vulnerable to any attacks. This was dealt with by constructing the Citadel to defend the settlements and castle. But if there were sea invaders in the past, they had to have come from somewhere. Again, it reinforces the idea of lands other than Hyrule existing. We've already established how Lurelin Village thrives off of the ocean. And they do have buildings that at one time may have been functional boats. Are they related to the sea invaders? And of course, there's the Zonai, who are described as a warlike tribe. They could be the sea invaders mentioned, or even have connections to residents of Lurelin. Though given the order of events related to the creation of the Citadel, it wouldn't make sense since they did have close ties with the Sheikah. Many shrines are found within Zonai ruins. This tribe certainly wasn't an enemy to them. Something else of interest that supports the theory of other countries is the Akkala Ancient Tech Lab. This laboratory was built right into an old abandoned lighthouse. Lighthouse means ships. Breath of the Wild 2's trailer has a moment where Link and Zelda are riding an animal. After looking through the compendium, none of Hyrule's creatures match this one's appearance. The closest ones are a water buffalo, Hateno cow, and great horned rhinoceros. But the creature in the trailer has 2 horns, and the tail is completely different from the water buffalo and cow. Therefore, there are 3 possible scenarios. Since this is a sequel, perhaps this is an animal that went extinct prior to the first game. That would mean that time travel may be in Breath of the Wild 2. Another possibility is that this is the result of crossbreeding. In fact, the compendium tells us the domestic Hateno cow was made through selective breeding of the water buffalo. The last possible scenario is that this creature originated from a different land. We won't know the answer until more news on the game releases. But isn't Demise's curse bound to Hyrule? Would the introduction of other kingdoms even be considered for the sequel? Let's look at some of the already known worlds within the Zelda series. Not ones like Termina or Koholint, as they're seen as parallel or illusionary worlds. There are 3 I would like to go over. The 2 countries of the Oracle games, Labrynna and Holodrum, and New Hyrule from Spirit Tracks. The story of Spirit Tracks is rather basic. An ancient evil is on the verge of returning to destroy the world, and our heroes must stop it. Ganondorf is never mentioned in this game, and neither are the Triforce or Master Sword, but events do happen that could be looked at as a calamity. This calamity would take the form of Malladus, who, like Ganon, is described as a Demon King. Very few share this title. In fact, the only other 2 who do are Ganondorf and Demise. Therefore, he does have a possible connection to the curse put on the hero long ago. But Malladus' first appearance was long before Tetra and her crew found the new continent. A fierce battle was fought between the Demon King and the Spirits of Good. This would have definitely taken place before Ganondorf was defeated in Wind Waker, and Demise's wording heavily implies that there can only be one incarnation of his hatred. This statement is the same in the Japanese version, but the translation of some of the other lines is interesting. My hatred, the curse of the demon tribe. They shall continually go on reincarnating until the end of all times. You people shall. You people who possess the blood of the goddess and the soul of the hero shall forever be unable to escape from this curse. If we are to believe the following, it means that Demise's curse might not be limited to himself or even Ganondorf. It's regarding the demon army in general, so Malladus and Chancellor Cole could also be of the same tribe. perhaps that could be a whole other video? There are some other parallels between the two. The spirits of good were the ones to create the spirit train, and that train has a crest very similar to Hylia's. They were also the ones who made the Locomo sword, which is another parallel to Hylia's goddess sword. And similar to Wind Waker and Ocarina of Time, Link deals the final blow by thrusting the blade into Malladus' forehead to kill him. But the real kicker is that the proper Japanese translations for Spirit of Good are both Kami of Light or the Heavenly One. In other words, the spirits of good might be a spirit of good. Suddenly, the opening to Spirit Tracks sounds a lot more familiar. Everything is peaceful until some Demon King rises to power and is fought in battle and sealed only to return later? Interesting. I'd also like to point out something interesting about Labrynna and Holodrum. These are countries separate from Hyrule, and yet the final boss of the games is Ganon. His appearance clearly isn't bound to Hyrule alone, and this raises a lot of possibilities for Breath of the Wild sequel along with future Zelda titles. The old man tells us that the Great Plateau was the birthplace of the Kingdom of Hyrule, but that's all it is. A kingdom. The continent found by Tetra and her crew was named New Hyrule after reinstating the Hylian monarchy. Demise's curse isn't necessarily bound to a single place. Before Demise's first appearance on the surface, the sealed grounds were known as Hylia's realm. After the events of Skyward Sword, the surface soon turned into the Kingdom of Hyrule. Gorons are a race seen in many games, including this one, but others such as the Kikwis and Mogmas don't make an appearance outside of Skyward Sword. Either they went extinct, evolved into other species, or are living on lands outside of Hyrule. The Anuki are a good example. They appear in Phantom Hourglass in a world that isn't the same as the one Hyrule is in, and yet in Spirit Tracks, one tells us that the same group had migrated from the Isle of Frost to New Hyrule, a continent that, unlike the former, does exist in the same world as Hyrule. And for a very long time, given the land's history. If Calamity Ganon did have an effect on these other lands, we won't know about it until more information is given. But when you look out at the sea in the game, islands are clearly visible aside from the ones we can access like Eventide. One of the events that would most certainly affect other worlds is the Blood Moon. The phenomenon began 100 years ago at the time of the Calamity. Malice is seen on the surface and is when Ganon's power is at its peak. This moon would most certainly be seen by neighboring kingdoms. So the real question is, what form does the Calamity take in these lands? For Daruk's sake, let's hope that none of them are giant dog monsters. But MBC, aren't you overanalyzing this game since Nintendo doesn't really care about the story? And the answer to that is yes.